invited my family to my wedding, but no one showed up. When I called my sister, she laughed coldly. Oh, was that today? You'll be divorced soon anyway, so it's a waste of time, she teased. My mom sighed over the phone. I'm in Paris right now, enjoying champagne with a view of the Eiffel Tower. Don't bother me with this nonsense. But when they returned home, I was the one smiling. For most people working in San Francisco's financial district, Monday mornings were depressing, but not for Eliza Carter. She had promised herself that she would walk with her head held high every morning as long as there were no wrinkles etched on her forehead. Gazing at her reflection in the computer screen, she took a deep breath. Today was a special day. The engagement ring from Thomas, her boyfriend of 3 years, sparkled on the ring finger of her left hand. Eliza smiled softly as she called her mother. Mom, I have something important to tell you. Her mother, Margaret's voice always carried a hint of tension, as if she were afraid someone might overhear her. I'm busy right now. I'm swamped preparing for Victoria Hilton's garden party. You know, Victoria is the most influential woman in town. Eliza quietly closed her eyes. Of course, she knew. Her mother uttered those words, most influential woman, at least once a week. It wasn't about actual power or wealth. It was merely a phrase that reflected Margaret's imaginary social status. I understand, but Mom, I got engaged to Thomas. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by Margaret's cold laugh. Oh, to that real estate agent? Eliza, you always sell yourself short. Look at Clara, she's dating a lawyer, a promising lawyer. Eliza lowered her gaze to the small succulent plant on her desk. It was the first gift from Thomas. Thomas is a good man. I think I can be happy with him, she said. Margaret sighed. Happiness is temporary, Eliza. I never thought you'd be the biggest disappointment in the family, but, well, it's your choice. After hanging up, Eliza felt something tightening in her chest, always criticized, always told she wasn't enough, but she had the courage to choose a different life. That evening, Eliza visited her sister Clara's apartment. The view from the top floor of the high-rise was breathtaking, but her sister's cold expression froze the air in the room. Engaged to him? Clara said, tilting her wine glass. You really have no ambition. Eliza sat on the sofa, gazing at the shelf decorated with photos of her niece, Sarah. I love Thomas, she said. Clara laughed. Love is just brain chemistry. It doesn't last. She stood up and walked to the window. Look at this Manhattan skyline. This is my love. This is what I've achieved. I'm happy. Clara turned around and looked down at Eliza, her beautiful face twisted into a sneer. You've always consoled yourself with that word happy, but face reality. The man you've chosen will spend his life selling other people's houses. On the other hand, I know, Eliza said quietly. You're successful. We hear about it every day. Clara's expression turned uncomfortable. I didn't mean to hurt you. She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for words. I just think you could do better. Before leaving the apartment, Eliza tried to show her engagement ring, but Clara merely said, Show me later. She met her brother Daniel at his surf shop. The San Diego sunlight illuminated his tanned skin, and Eliza always envied the sense of freedom her brother possessed. Congratulations! Daniel gave her a light hug, but the embrace was brief and somehow formal. But honestly, I understand what Mom and Clara are saying. Eliza stared at the beach and whispered, You too? Sis, he said, making footprints in the sand. Is there anything special about Thomas? He loves me. Isn't that enough? Daniel shrugged. Sure, but we, the Carters, we should aim higher. Eliza smiled bitterly at her brother's words. The term the Carters sounded as if they were royalty. Her family was merely middle class, but Margaret's dreamy social ambitions had permeated her children. As she prepared for the wedding, Eliza had the opportunity to meet Thomas's parents. They welcomed her warmly, especially Thomas's mother, Eleanor, who embraced her with a warmth Eliza had never felt from her own mother. I'm glad you chose Thomas, Eleanor said with a quiet smile. That night, back in her hotel room, Eliza looked at her engagement ring and cried. Why couldn't her family be happy for her? Why were her choices always deemed not enough? But meeting Thomas's parents gave her a small hope. Maybe on her wedding day, her family would open their hearts. Maybe seeing her happiness would help them understand the true meaning of family. With that thought, she carefully placed wedding invitations in envelopes, 3 invitations for her mother, sister, and brother, each containing her wishes for a new life. The soft June sunlight streamed through the windows, creating enchanting lines of light in the venue. Eliza, dressed in an elegant wedding gown, stood in front of a large window. Her skin glowed faintly with nervousness and anticipation, her eyes reflecting a mix of anxiety and hope. She checked her watch repeatedly and gazed out the window. They should be here soon, she murmured softly. The special seats prepared in the front row were still empty. A small sign on a tripod saying family seats accentuated the loneliness of the empty chairs. Wedding planner Sophie entered the room. Eliza, the ceremony begins in 15 minutes. Are you ready? Eliza forced a smile. Yes, I'm fine. It's just my family hasn't arrived yet. Sophie nodded kindly. It might be traffic. Don't worry. They'll make it in time. Eliza clutched her smartphone and looked out the window again. The clear blue sky of San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance, everything was perfect for the day. Except for one thing. The door opened and Thomas entered, wearing a white tuxedo. His face showed signs of concern. Eliza, are you okay? He gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Your family. Eliza pushed back her hair with a trembling hand. I still haven't heard from them. They're not answering their phones. They'll come. Thomas tried to embrace her gently, taking care not to wrinkle her dress. There must be a reason. Eliza looked into Thomas's eyes. His gaze reflected worry and a somewhat sad understanding. He knew a lot about her family, the criticism she had received, the cold attitudes, and how she had always been told she was not enough. I'll try calling one more time, Eliza said, her fingers trembling as she operated her smartphone. She first called her sister Clara. After 3 rings, her cold voice came through. Clara, where are you? The ceremony is about to start. Eliza tried to maintain a cheerful voice. From the other end of the phone, Clara's laughter could be heard, a cold, icy laugh. Oh, was that today? Eliza was momentarily speechless. I sent you an invitation, didn't I? I called to confirm 3 weeks ago. Yes, Clara's voice was like a cold winter wind, but you'll probably be divorced soon anyway, so it's a waste of time. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Face reality. Someone like you can't have a happy marriage. Mom said so too. Eliza was at a loss for words and simply hung up. Thomas stood by her side and held her hand. Are you okay? Eliza shook her head and next called her mother. Margaret's phone rang 4 times before she answered. Eliza, oh, was that today? Margaret's voice sounded distant and somehow flippant. I'm in Paris now, enjoying champagne while gazing at the Eiffel Tower. Don't bother me with such trivial matters. Paris? Eliza's voice cracked. Listen, Eliza. Margaret's voice suddenly turned cold. Grow up. No one cares about your wedding, especially with that what was his name again? Thomas. Your marriage to him? Eliza hung up without a word. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks. With one last hope, she called Daniel. He answered after 2 rings. Where are you? The ceremony is about to begin. I'm sorry. Daniel's voice had a tinge of regret, but it was still cold. There's a surfing competition, and if Mom and Clara aren't going, I won't go either. Sorry. After the call ended, Eliza just stood there. Her wedding dress reflected the morning light, but her heart sank into darkness. Thomas took her hand and said quietly, Let's move forward without family. My family is your family now. Eliza wiped her tears. Do you really think so? Of course. He kissed her hand. Today is the start of a new beginning. Let's leave the past behind. The ceremony began as scheduled. Eliza walked down the aisle, escorted by Thomas's father. She looked around at the audience. There were many faces: Thomas's family, friends, and her few friends, but the faces she most wanted to see weren't there. After exchanging vows, Thomas's father, Charles, suddenly stood up. He was a tall, dignified man. "From today, Eliza is a precious member of our family," his voice echoed throughout the venue. "In the name of the Crawford family, those who have hurt her will face consequences." Eliza looked at him in surprise. "Crawford family?" At that moment, Thomas whispered in her ear, "I didn't tell you, but my father is the CEO of Crawford Enterprises. I'm also set to take on an important position in the company." Eliza gasped. Crawford Enterprises, one of America's leading corporations. Various dots began connecting in her mind. Thomas's occasional disappearances for long business trips, his sophisticated demeanor, and why he never asked much about her family. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eliza asked softly. "I wanted to protect you," Thomas quietly replied. "I wanted to make sure you loved me for who I am, not for my name or status." Thomas's mother embraced her. "You have value. Those who abandoned you will eventually regret it." At the end of the ceremony, Eliza and Thomas exchanged a kiss of commitment. Warm applause erupted from the audience. Eliza said with a determined expression, "Thomas, I'm so happy to have met you. Let's make our new life the best it can be." Thomas smiled. "I've seen clearly today what kind of people your family are. I won't let them hurt you anymore." Amidst tears and laughter in Thomas's arms, Eliza whispered, "The beginning of my new life and the beginning of a small revenge on my family." A flame of determination burned in her eyes. 6 months had passed. In her office on the top floor of Crawford Tower, one of the most eye-catching skyscrapers in San Francisco, Eliza gazed out the window. The entire city seemed to spread out at her feet. Her life had completely changed in these 6 months. Once an employee at a mid-sized real estate company, she was now the head of public relations at Crawford Enterprises. A young female assistant entered her office. "We're ready for the interview." Eliza took a deep breath and checked her appearance in the window. A silk blouse with a perfectly fitting skirt, her hair elegantly styled, and her rings modest yet luxurious. She smiled at herself. "Thank you." "Let's go." On the first floor of Crawford Tower, a local news crew was waiting. As Eliza stepped out of the elevator, the cameraman and staff turned their attention to her. She approached them with a confident walk she had never imagined possible before. "Thank you for your time today." A female reporter extended her hand toward Eliza. "For our community feature, we'd like to hear about Crawford Enterprises' social contribution activities." Eliza smiled gracefully. "Thank you for having me." They were guided to a beautifully furnished lounge in the building. As the camera started rolling, the interview began. "As Mrs. Crawford and the face of the corporation, please tell us about giving back to the community," the reporter asked her. Eliza responded with a serene expression. "I've been fortunate to be blessed with a wonderful husband and a new family. Life takes unexpected turns. I'm especially grateful to those who taught me what a true family means." She smiled at the camera. There was a hidden strength in that smile. "At Crawford Enterprises, we've launched a new family support program. It's a fund specifically to support those who have been hurt by emotional abuse or neglect. Family isn't just about blood, it's about relationships where people respect and value each other. I personally experienced being abandoned by my own family on my wedding day, but I've overcome that pain and learned the true meaning of family." The reporter showed a surprised expression. "That must have been a difficult experience." Eliza nodded quietly. "It was certainly painful, but it gave me strength. Now I want to empower others who have had similar experiences." The interview continued for 30 minutes, with Eliza speaking calmly about the company's social contributions and her own experiences. After the camera stopped, the reporter approached her. "Thank you so much for your wonderful story. Your story will inspire many people." Eliza held her hand. "Thank you. I'd be happy if I could help even one person." Back at the office, Thomas was waiting for her. He smiled proudly when he saw her. "You were magnificent, Eliza." He kissed her. "How was the interview?" "Smoother than I expected." Eliza smiled in his arms. "How are the preparations for the social media campaign?" Thomas nodded. "Everything's on track. We're planning to start tomorrow. We'll share photos from your wedding and messages about family bonds, including photos of a wedding where no family came." Eliza looked at him. "If that's what you want," Thomas answered with a serious expression. "But if it's too painful..." Eliza shook her head. "No, that's important. By sharing the truth, we can give hope to others who are experiencing similar feelings." The next day, Crawford Enterprises launched a major social media campaign. Along with photos from Eliza and Thomas's wedding, they shared a message about what true family means. It included the truth that her family didn't attend the wedding. The campaign generated a huge response, with many people empathizing with Eliza's experience. Her interview was broadcast nationwide, and her presence and status as the wife of a corporate executive became widely known. Her story was featured in news outlets across the country, sparking discussions about what family means. Meanwhile, criticism poured in against her actual family. One morning, Eliza received an email at her office. She gasped when she saw the sender's name. It was from Clara. "Dear Eliza, I saw your news recently. I had no idea you held such a position. Why didn't you tell me? I'm sorry about that day. I really was planning to come, but I had an important meeting that day. How are you? Looking forward to hearing from you, Clara." Eliza read the email twice. Then she laughed quietly. A lie. On her wedding day, Clara had said, "You'll probably be divorced soon anyway." She decided not to reply. The following week, Eliza received a call from a friend. "Eliza, you won't believe it. I heard your mother has been gradually distanced by her friends since returning from Paris. Everyone's asking her, 'I saw your daughter on TV, a corporate executive's wife. Is it true you didn't go to the wedding?'" Eliza said nothing. She just felt a small satisfaction spreading in her chest. Around the same time, Clara began to be repeatedly questioned by customers at the high-end boutique where she worked. "Are you the sister of that Crawford woman? Why didn't you go to the wedding?" Gradually, the number of customers decreased, and she started receiving cold glances from the store manager. Changes also came to her brother Daniel. The surf brand he had a sponsorship contract with suddenly terminated it. He was told, "We can't do business with companies associated with Crawford Enterprises." Margaret no longer received invitations to social gatherings. Clara lost her job and Daniel lost his sponsors. The three of them were in dire financial and social straits. One evening, Eliza's smartphone rang. Clara's name appeared on the screen. Eliza hesitated for a moment but answered the call. "Eliza?" Clara's voice no longer had its previous coldness. Instead, it sounded somewhat anxious. "I saw you on TV recently." "You're amazing, by the way," Eliza interrupted her. "You thought my wedding would be a waste of time because I'd probably be divorced soon, right? Unfortunately, I'm having a happy marriage. Do you need something?" "No, I just wanted to see how my sister was doing," Clara tried to cover up. "Really? Or is there something you want from Miss S. Crawford?" Eliza calmly asked. Clara fell silent and hung up. Eliza put down her smartphone and gazed out the window. The San Francisco skyline reflecting in her eyes was the same as 6 months ago, but she herself had changed drastically. No longer a small existence suffering from family expectations and criticism, she had become a strong woman carving out her own destiny. Thomas embraced her from behind. "No regrets?" Eliza smiled in his arms. "No, not at all. This isn't revenge. It's justice, just letting the world know what they did to me." A year had passed. Eliza and Thomas had established a mansion in an upscale residential area in the suburbs of San Francisco. Eliza stood by the window, gazing at the flowers blooming in the garden. A year ago today, she had her wedding without family. That pain was still deep in her heart, but it no longer dominated her thinking. Thomas stood beside her and put his arm around her shoulder. Eliza smiled a little. I was remembering what happened a year ago. Thomas kissed her on the cheek. You've become so strong this past year. Eliza nodded, gazing out the window. Yes, but sometimes I wonder how they're doing. Do you want to know? Thomas quietly asked. Eliza looked at her husband. Do you know? I had them investigated. Thomas smiled a bit apologetically. For your happiness. He handed her some documents. They detailed the current situations of Margaret, Clara, and Daniel. Margaret had been completely ostracized from society, had to give up her luxurious apartment, and moved into a small room. Clara had lost her job at the high-end boutique, drifted from job to job without lasting long, and now lived in a cheap apartment in a small town. Daniel had lost his surfing sponsors, accumulated debt, and was sleeping on a friend's sofa. So much. Eliza choked on her words. Just as you intended, Thomas said quietly. There was no hint of blame in his voice. They hurt you. Now they're facing the consequences. Eliza pressed her forehead against the window. The cold glass seemed to absorb her heat. Is this what I wanted? Only you can decide that. Thomas held her hand. That afternoon, while Eliza was reading in the garden, she received word from the caretaker that she had visitors. Mr. and Mrs. Carter are here to see you. Eliza caught her breath. Show them in. When she entered the living room, Margaret, Clara, and Daniel were standing there. All three looked vastly different from how Eliza remembered them. Margaret's hair had turned white, and her shoulders were rounded. Clara's beauty had faded, and her face showed signs of hardship. Daniel was thin, and his tanned skin lacked vitality. It's been a while. Margaret looked at her daughter with a forced smile. The superiority in her eyes was gone, replaced by anxiety and fear. What a lovely home, she said. Eliza responded calmly with a quiet strength. Sit down. Would you like something to drink? No, that's fine, Clara quickly said. Do you have some business here? Eliza asked with a smile. Her voice was gentle, but her gaze was sharp. No, I just wanted to see my daughter. Margaret's words trailed off. Her hands were trembling. Really? Or are you interested in my new status? Eliza sat gracefully in a chair. Her silk dress reflected the light and gleamed. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Daniel spoke up. Sis, I'll be honest. We're in trouble. Margaret glared at her son, but he continued. There's no point in hiding it. We've all lost our jobs, been abandoned by friends. That's unfortunate, Eliza said evenly. But what can I do about it? Finally, Margaret sighed. Eliza, help us. Her voice was trembling. Friends are avoiding me and I've been shut out of society, Clara added. I can't find work either. No one will hire me. When I call, they just say, Mrs. Crawford's sister, the one who didn't go to the wedding. Daniel bowed his head. I'm drowning in debt. All my sponsors cut me off. Everyone says they can't do business with anyone connected to Crawford Enterprises. Eliza took a deep breath and calmly replied, I see. So what do you want me to do? We want you to help us with your influence, Margaret pleaded. Tears welled up in her eyes. With just a word from you, everything could change. Oh, wasn't it you who said, don't bother me with such trivial matters? Eliza repeated her mother's words sarcastically. Her voice was cold, but her eyes showed sadness. Margaret covered her face with both hands. About that day, I'm sorry, but I didn't know you were the wife of such a major corporation executive. Eliza stood up and walked to the window. So if you had known, you would have come to the wedding? The three fell silent. That silence seemed like an answer to Eliza. Do you think family is? Eliza turned and asked. Blood ties, Margaret answered immediately. No. Eliza's voice was strong yet tinged with sadness. It's the people who support me and recognize my value. Your not coming to the wedding was a big blow to me, but at the same time, it taught me who my true family is. Eliza stood before the three. I forgive you. Margaret and Clara's eyes widened. Daniel looked up. But forgiveness and regaining trust are different things, Eliza continued. It takes time to rebuild trust. Go home today. When you're truly sorry and ready to become a true family, come back. But our situation, Clara said weakly. Aren't you adults? Eliza said calmly. Accepting the consequences of your choices is also an adult's duty. Margaret and the others were speechless and left with expressions of humiliation and regret. After the door closed, Eliza stood by the window and watched her family's car drive away. Her feelings were complex, the sweet taste of revenge mixed with the sadness of losing her family. Thomas quietly entered the room. Are you okay? Eliza turned from the window and gave a weak smile. Yes, that was tough. Thomas placed his hand on her shoulder. It was necessary, Eliza said quietly, but this isn't the end. What do you mean? True strength is the power to forgive, Eliza said, gazing out the window. But trust isn't easily regained. They need time and effort. And I also need time to fully forgive. Eliza and Thomas stood with their arms linked, gazing out the window. In the suburbs of San Francisco, Eliza and Thomas's garden was decorated for Christmas. Vibrant lights adorned the trees, and the cold winter air carried the scent of cinnamon and pie. 5 years after their marriage, they had a 3-year-old daughter, Charlotte, with golden curls and blue eyes. Charlotte had inherited Eliza's features and Thomas's smile. Eliza was making final preparations for dinner in the kitchen. She had been promoted to vice president of Crawford Enterprises and had established a charity foundation supporting families. Her work gave hope to many families and helped repair family relationships. Mom, when are Grandma and the others coming? Charlotte asked in a small voice. She wore a red velvet dress and looked like a little Christmas angel. Eliza gently stroked her daughter's head. Soon, Charlotte. Are you looking forward to it? Charlotte nodded energetically. Yes, Grandma always gives me presents. But is it true that you and Grandma weren't close in the past? Eliza was momentarily at a loss for words. Children's straightforward questions sometimes confound adults. Yes, we had a somewhat difficult relationship in the past, but people can change. The doorbell rang, and Charlotte ran with her little feet. They're here! When the door opened, Margaret was standing there. Her once haughty attitude was gone, replaced by a gentle smile. Eliza, Charlotte, Merry Christmas. Margaret lived alone in a small apartment, abandoned by her former friends, and completely disappeared from society. Her expression no longer showed the vanity of before, but instead a quiet acceptance. She was occasionally invited to Eliza's charity events and truly cherished the time spent with her granddaughter, Charlotte. Next to arrive was Daniel. He appeared in a suit with a neat hairstyle. Sis, Merry Christmas, he said with a humble smile. With Eliza's help, Daniel had repaid his debts and started working for a subcontractor of Crawford Enterprises. He worked diligently and continued to make sincere efforts to repair his relationship with his sister. Finally, Clara arrived. Her flashy demeanor was gone, replaced by the image of a composed adult woman. Eliza, Charlotte, it's been a while. Clara had moved to a small town in the countryside and started a new life as a hairdresser. Although she struggled to repair her relationship with Eliza, they had begun to keep in touch several times a year. She confessed to the locals, "I'm ashamed I looked down on my sister," and was learning to live humbly. The Christmas dinner table was bathed in warm light. However, a faint tension lingered in the air. The conversation was polite but not heartfelt. Toward the end of the meal, Margaret suddenly stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. Eliza, I want to apologize to you. I was a terrible mother. I didn't recognize your value and hurt you. But you've become a much better person than I am. You don't have to forgive me. I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. The room fell silent. Thomas and Charlotte looked at Eliza. Eliza took her mother's hand and gently squeezed it. Mom, we can't change the past, but we can create the future. Charlotte has only one grandmother. Let's create a new family history together. Late that night, after everyone had left, Eliza was writing in her diary in the study. The day of my wedding, when my family didn't come, was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But now, I'm grateful. Without that day, I wouldn't have known my own strength or the true meaning of family. I learned that forgiveness ultimately fills the heart more than revenge, and above all, that my value is not determined by others. Eliza smiled as she gazed at the sunset visible from the window. My family who skipped my wedding, but in the end, we all managed to find new bonds.